hands behind your back.
I'm going.
Put your hands.
I'm going peacefully, son.
Get back. Get back.
Hey, he's recording this case.
That's fine. He can record all he wants.
That's all right. I'm a
Turn around and face the traffic.
I'm already cuffed.
The car. Get in the car. Get in when you. I'm gonna tase you. Get in the car. Get damn.
Police corruption is a widespread issue that undermines trust in law enforcement. Officers, regardless of their race or background, have been involved in illegal activities such as drug dealing, brutality, and cover-ups. They are supposed to uphold the law and protect the innocent, but instead choose to abuse their power and engage in criminal activities. Today, we are diving into the dark world of police corruption as we explore the lives of the most corrupt cops in history. Joseph Mianowski, in the dark underbelly of law enforcement. Born and raised in Chicago, Mianowski's journey from an ordinary kid to the most corrupt cop in history is a chilling testament to the depths of human depravity. From a young age, Mianowski idolized the police officers in his hometown. He dreamed of one day wearing the badge and making a difference in his community. As he grew older, his dedication to law enforcement only intensified. He excelled in his training and quickly rose through the ranks, earning a reputation as a dedicated and trustworthy officer. However, as Mianowski's career progressed, so did his thirst for power and greed. The allure of money and influence began to cloud his judgment, leading him down a dark path of corruption. His corruption took the form of running his own drug gang. He used his position as a police officer to shake down drug dealers, stealing their drugs and money for his own illicit operations. He was also putting the lives of his fellow undercover police officers at risk by leaking their information to his drug dealer contacts. He would contact them and let them know whenever an undercover cop was in their neighborhood.
Mianowski was calling these people and tipping them off as to who the buy officers were and what they were driving. So these guys knew before we got there that we were out there with buy officers trying to buy drugs from them.
He became a kingpin in the very streets he was supposed to protect, using his badge as a shield to cover his criminal activities. Mianowski had become a drug lord himself, a kingpin hiding in plain sight. One of the most shocking aspects of Mianowski's reign of terror was his ability to operate with impunity. He had a network of corrupt officers who helped him cover up his crimes, ensuring that he remained untouchable. He started accepting bribes from drug dealers and gang members, turning a blind eye to their illegal activities in exchange for financial gain. Mianowski's once promising career became tainted by his insatiable greed. This allowed him to amass a vast fortune and wield immense power within the criminal underworld.
He can set the rules instead of just breaking them. He doesn't have to pay the price for what he's clearly done that's been wrong.
But as the saying goes, the bigger they are, the harder they fall. Mianowski's empire would eventually crumble thanks to the relentless efforts of a few brave individuals determined to expose the truth. Mianowski's corrupt activities caught the attention of federal authorities. In the late 1990s, an investigation led by the FBI and the Chicago Police Department's Internal Affairs Division began to uncover the extent of Mianowski's corruption. A thorough investigation was launched, uncovering a web of deceit and betrayal. When Mianowski realized he was being investigated, he went into damage control mode. He tried to get rid of evidence, warning his associates to cover their tracks. But the FBI was one step ahead. They arrested 23 of his drug cohorts, who turned on him in exchange for reduced sentences. Through wiretaps, surveillance, and the cooperation of former associates, law enforcement officials were able to gather enough evidence to bring Mianowski to justice. In 2001, he was arrested and charged with a litany of crimes, including drug trafficking, conspiracy, and corruption. The evidence against Mianowski was overwhelming, leaving no doubt about his involvement in criminal activities. The once respected officer was now exposed as the most corrupt cop in history.
He was not somebody who was simply protecting criminals. He had become a criminal.
The revelation of Mianowski's corruption sent shockwaves through the community he had sworn to protect. The trust between law enforcement and the citizens of Chicago was shattered, leaving a deep scar that would take years to heal. The community felt betrayed and vulnerable, questioning the integrity of the entire police force. Mianowski's actions had far-reaching consequences that would be felt for generations to come.
He betrayed the very community he was supposed to protect and serve. Can you trust the police? And when people like Joe Mianowski are allowed to fester out there, that's a tough question to answer. You can't trust them all.
In the aftermath of Mianowski's downfall, sweeping reforms were implemented within the Chicago Police Department. Stricter oversight and accountability measures were put in place to prevent such corruption from happening again. The community rallied together, demanding justice and transparency. While the wounds caused by Mianowski's actions may never fully heal, the reforms served as a glimmer of hope for a brighter future. Stephen Kakaa and Louis Ippolito, two former New York City Police Department (NYPD) detectives, led lives that were seemingly ordinary at first glance. However, beneath the surface, a dark and corrupt world awaited them. Stephen Kakaa, born in the 1940s, had a long and distinguished career in the NYPD. He joined the force with a strong sense of duty and a desire to protect and serve the community. Karakaa's dedication and investigative skills quickly earned him a reputation as one of the department's finest detectives. He was known for his meticulous attention to detail and his ability to solve even the most complex cases. Karakaa's career took a turn when he was assigned to the Organized Crime Homicide Unit. It was here that he first encountered the dark underbelly of the city, where the mafia held sway. As he delved deeper into his investigations, Kakaa began to form connections with members of the Lucchese and Gambino crime families. These connections would prove to be his downfall. Louis Ippolito, on the other hand, came from a family with ties to the Gambino crime family. Born in the 1950s, Ippolito grew up surrounded by the allure of the mafia. However, he chose a different path and joined the NYPD in 1969. Ippolito's decision to become a police officer was driven by a desire to distance himself from his family's criminal ties and make a positive impact on society. Ippolito quickly rose through the ranks of the NYPD, earning a reputation as a dedicated and resourceful detective. He was known for his street smarts and his ability to navigate the complex world of organized crime. Ippolito's experiences on the force would later become the basis for a book he wrote, in which he claimed to have tried to avoid getting involved with the mafia. Both Kakaa and Ippolito had successful careers within the NYPD, earning the respect and admiration of their colleagues. However, their paths would eventually converge, leading them down a dark and treacherous road. By the 1980s, Kakaa and Ippolito had established connections with the Lucchese and Gambino crime families, becoming known as the Mafia Cops. Their involvement with the mafia would lead them to engage in a wide range of criminal activities, including receiving bribes and carrying out murders on behalf of the mafia. Their descent into corruption was marked by a series of shocking events. Kakaa and Ippolito were implicated in several high-profile killings, including those of James Heidel, Bruno Facciolo, and Edward Lino. These murders sent shockwaves through the community, leaving many wondering how two trusted police officers could be involved in such heinous crimes. After retiring from the NYPD, Kakaa and Ippolito continued their involvement with the mafia, even relocating to Las Vegas. It was here that they were approached to carry out hits on John Jr. Gotti and Stephen Wonderboy Crea, two prominent figures within the mafia. However, these attempts were unsuccessful. In addition to their failed assassination attempts, Kakaa and Ippolito conspired to kill Salvatore Sammy the Bull Gravano, a former mafia member turned government witness. Their involvement in these plots further highlighted the extent of their corruption and the lengths they were willing to go to protect their criminal connections. The unraveling of their corruption came from an unexpected source. Betty Heidel, a woman from Staten Island, recognized Ippolito on a talk show and realized that he was one of the detectives who had come looking for her son Jimmy years ago. She had always suspected their involvement in her son's disappearance, and now she had the opportunity to bring her suspicions to the police. Betty Heidel's information caught the attention of Detective Tommy Dades, a seasoned investigator with the NYPD. He listened to her story and was struck by the clarity of her memory and her conviction that Ippolito was involved. Dades knew he had to investigate further.
Betty imparted some information to Tommy that she had never told anyone in law enforcement before. And that was on the day that her son Jimmy disappeared, Lou Ippolito and Steve Kakaa were outside her house looking for her son Jimmy.
Dades and his team began digging into the old case files, hoping to find any evidence that could link Ippolito and Kakaa to Jimmy Heidel's disappearance. As they went through the files, they discovered a shocking connection between the two detectives and the mafia. It turned out that Anthony Gaspeep Casso, a former underboss of the Lucchese crime family, had mentioned Ippolito and Kakaa as his informants and hitmen during his cooperation with the government. Jimmy Heidel, the son of Betty Heidel, was involved the shooter who tried to kill Anthony Casso. Because of this, he was brought by the mob cops to Casso.
The driveway, I brought him in there, sat him down. I wanted to know why I was shot, and who told you, and who else was involved, and who gave you the orders to shoot me. After that, I killed the kid myself.
This revelation was a turning point in the investigation. Dades and his team realized that they were dealing with something much bigger than just one missing person case. They had stumbled upon a massive corruption scandal within the NYPD. With the evidence mounting, Dades and Assistant District Attorney Mike Vecchione decided to open a full-scale investigation into Kakaa and Ippolito's activities. They gathered boxes of materials related to the mafia investigations from 10 years prior and started connecting the dots.
I think it might have been about 10 boxes worth of material.
In 2005, Kakaa and Ippolito's reign of corruption came to an end when they were arrested and charged with racketeering, murder, and other crimes. The evidence against them was overwhelming, and they were convicted in 2006. Although their racketeering murder conviction was later thrown out on a technicality, their racketeering convictions were reinstated in 2008. At trial, Bert Kaplan, one of their mafia contacts, testified that the mob cops arranged for murders and handed over targets to the Lucchese family. The evidence presented was overwhelming, and Kakaa and Ippolito were ultimately convicted and sentenced to life in prison. The impact of Kakaa and Ippolito's corruption on the community was profound. Their actions eroded trust in law enforcement and left many feeling betrayed. The city of New York paid millions of dollars in settlements to the families of their victims, attempting to provide some form of justice and compensation for the pain and suffering caused by these corrupt officers. Kakaa passed away in prison in 2017, while Ippolito died in federal custody in 2019. The cause of Ippolito's death has not been disclosed, leaving some unanswered questions surrounding the final chapter of their story. However, their legacy as the mafia cops will forever be remembered as a shocking example of corruption within the ranks of law enforcement. The case of Kakaa and Ippolito highlighted the need for reforms within the NYPD to prevent similar instances of corruption in the future. The department implemented stricter background checks and increased oversight to ensure that officers with ties to organized crime are not able to infiltrate the force. These reforms aim to restore public trust and maintain the integrity of the NYPD. John Burge. John Graham Burge was born on December 20th, 1947, in Chicago, Illinois. Growing up in a working-class neighborhood, Burge's childhood seemed unremarkable. However, his life took a dark turn when he enlisted in the United States Army and served tours in South Korea and Vietnam during the late 1960s and early 1970s. Burge's military service earned him several commendations for valor, but it also exposed him to the harsh realities of war. It is believed that his experiences in Vietnam had a profound impact on his later behavior as a police officer. After completing his military service, Burge returned to Chicago and joined the city's police department in 1970. With his military background, he quickly rose through the ranks, displaying a relentless determination and an aggressive approach to law enforcement. Burge's career in the Chicago Police Department seemed promising at first, but it would soon take a sinister turn. As he climbed the ranks, he became involved in numerous cases of police brutality and abuse, particularly targeting black suspects. His tactics were marked by a complete disregard for the rights and well-being of those he was meant to protect. His abuses were often carried out by a group of officers known as the Midnight Crew, or the A-Team. This group, led by Burge, operated with impunity, using their positions of power to inflict pain and suffering on those they deemed as criminals.
Burge trained his officers, he picked his officers, and it was his crew that was perpetrating the abuse that was inflicted on these men.
Burge's reputation for brutality and corruption grew, and his methods became increasingly extreme. He would use various forms of torture, including beating, suffocation, burning, and electrical shock, to force false confessions from suspects. The victims, predominantly African-American men, endured unimaginable pain and trauma at the hands of Burge and his accomplices. Despite the mounting evidence of his misconduct, Burge's actions went unchecked for years within the Chicago Police Department. His abuses were covered up, and he continued to rise through the ranks, earning promotions and accolades for his supposed achievements in law enforcement.
I think nobody reacted because, as a culture, we do like tough cops. We like the guy who bends the rules. On TV, they always bend the rules in favor of what we perceive as justice. They get the bad guy by bending the rules.
But the truth about Burge's reign of terror could only be suppressed for so long. In the early 1990s, brave individuals began to come forward, sharing their stories of torture and abuse at the hands of Burge and his accomplices. Their testimonies would expose the systemic corruption within the Chicago Police Department and spark a movement for justice. As the testimonies of Burge's victims began to surface in the early 1990s, the truth about his reign of terror could no longer be ignored. The stories of torture and abuse inflicted upon predominantly African-American men sent shockwaves through the community and sparked outrage.
The pain
that I felt was something that I had never experienced before in my life.
The mounting evidence against Burge and his accomplices forced the Chicago Police Department to take action. In 1991, Burge was suspended from the force, and in 1993, he was finally fired. It was a long overdue acknowledgement of the heinous crimes he had committed. However, it would take several more years for justice to catch up with Burge. In 2002, a 4-year review of his actions was conducted, revealing numerous crimes and improprieties. The review exposed a pattern of corruption and abuse that had been allowed to flourish within the Chicago Police Department. The findings of the review were shocking, but due to the statute of limitations, no indictments could be made against Burge or his accomplices. It seemed as though they would escape punishment for their horrific acts, but the fight for justice was far from over. In 2003, Governor George Ryan took a significant step towards righting the wrongs of Burge's reign. He pardoned 4 of Burge's victims who had been coerced into confessing and were on death row. It was a powerful acknowledgement of the wrongful convictions that had resulted from Burge's torture and abuse. The pardons brought renewed attention to Burge's crimes and reignited the public's demand for accountability. The pressure on the justice system to hold him accountable continued to mount. In 2008, Burge's day of reckoning finally arrived. He was charged with obstruction of justice and perjury in relation to a civil suit filed against him for damages resulting from his alleged torture. The trial was a pivotal moment in the pursuit of justice for Burge's victims. In 2010, after a lengthy trial, Burge was convicted on all counts. The verdict was a resounding affirmation that no one, not even those in positions of power, could escape the consequences of their actions. Burge was sentenced to 4.5 years in federal prison, a small measure of justice for the countless lives he had irreparably damaged. The conviction of John Burge was a turning point in the fight against police brutality and corruption. It sent a clear message that the abuse of power would not be tolerated, and those responsible would be held accountable. But the impact of Burge's crimes extended far beyond his own conviction. Burge served the majority of his sentence at the Federal Correctional Institution Butner Low, near Butner, North Carolina. However, in 2014, he was released from prison to serve the remainder of his sentence in a halfway house. The end of his incarceration marked a bittersweet moment for the victims and their families, who had long awaited justice. Following his release, Burge's life took a quieter turn. He lived out his remaining years in Florida, where he had relocated after his dismissal from the police department. However, the impact of his crimes continued to reverberate throughout the city of Chicago and beyond. Then, on September 19, 2018, John Burge passed away at the age of 70. His death prompted mixed reactions, with some acknowledging the harm he had caused and others offering condolences to his family. It marked the end of a chapter in Chicago's history, but the scars left by Burge's reign of terror would forever remain. Raphael Perez. In the late 1990s, Raphael Perez's descent into corruption took a sinister turn when he became involved in a shocking case of brutality and deception. It all began when Perez, a member of the Community Resources Against Street Hoodlums (CRASH) task force, targeted an unarmed gang member named Javier Ovando. In an act of sheer brutality, Perez and his partner framed Ovando by shooting him and providing false testimony to cover up their actions. The incident occurred in 1996 when Perez and his partner confronted Ovando, who was unarmed at the time. In a shocking display of abuse of power, Perez shot Ovando, leaving him critically injured and permanently paralyzed. To further compound their wrongdoing, Perez and his partner concocted a false narrative, claiming that Ovando had fired at them first. This fabricated story was meant to justify their excessive use of force and protect themselves from the consequences of their actions. As a result of Perez's deceitful actions, Javier Ovando was wrongfully convicted and sentenced to 23 years in prison for a crime he did not commit. Ovando's life was forever altered, confined to a wheelchair, and robbed of his freedom due to the corrupt actions of those sworn to protect and serve. The shocking truth behind Perez's involvement in the shooting and framing of Javier Ovando would eventually come to light, unraveling the web of corruption that had plagued the LAPD. But the impact on Ovando and his family was irreversible, as they had endured years of suffering and injustice at the hands of a corrupt cop. As if Raphael Perez's involvement in the shooting and framing of Javier Ovando wasn't enough, his descent into corruption took an even more shocking turn. Perez, a member of the LAPD's CRASH task force, engaged in a series of criminal activities that involved stealing and reselling a significant amount of cocaine from the LAPD's evidence lockers. Perez, entrusted with the responsibility of safeguarding the evidence that was meant to bring criminals to justice, instead succumbed to the allure of greed and power. He abused his position of authority to pilfer cocaine from the very institution he was sworn to uphold. This brazen act of corruption not only undermined the integrity integrity of the LAPD, but also had far-reaching consequences for the community it served. The stolen cocaine, which was meant to be used as evidence in criminal cases, found its way back onto the streets, perpetuating the cycle of drug abuse and crime. Perez's actions not only compromised ongoing investigations, but also allowed dangerous substances to remain in circulation, posing a threat to the very community he was meant to protect. The extent of Perez's involvement in this illicit operation remains shocking. The stolen cocaine was not only used for personal gain, but also resold to further fuel the drug trade. The impact of his actions reverberated throughout the community, contributing to the destruction and devastation caused by drug addiction. His actions exposed a level of corruption that was unimaginable, tarnishing the reputation of the LAPD and eroding the trust between law enforcement and the community they served. But there is yet another shocking allegation that has captured public attention. Perez has been accused of being involved in the murder of the iconic rapper Christopher Wallace, also known as the Notorious B.I.G. The murder of the Notorious B.I.G. in 1997 sent shockwaves through the music industry and the world. As the investigation unfolded, rumors and speculation began to circulate, implicating Perez in this high-profile crime. It was alleged that Perez, along with other individuals, conspired to murder Christopher Wallace. However, it is important to note that these allegations remain just that, allegations. While Perez's name was mentioned in connection to the case, there is no concrete evidence to support the claim that he was on duty or directly involved in the night of Wallace's murder. The investigation into the murder of the Notorious B.I.G. remains unsolved, leaving many questions unanswered. Nonetheless, the mere suggestion of Perez's potential involvement in such a high-profile and tragic event added another layer of intrigue to his already notorious reputation. It further fueled the public's fascination with the dark underbelly of the LAPD and the extent of corruption that had infiltrated its ranks. The allegations connecting Perez to the murder of the Notorious B.I.G. have been a subject of intense speculation and have been explored in various forms of media. However, it is crucial to separate fact from fiction and rely on concrete evidence when examining such serious accusations. In a shocking turn of events, Raphael Perez, the corrupt cop at the center of the Rampart scandal, eventually cooperated with authorities, revealing the extent of the corruption that had plagued the LAPD's Rampart division. Perez's decision to come forward had far-reaching implications and sent shockwaves through the law enforcement community.
On the criminal side, he's acknowledged that 57 cases involving 99 suspects are tainted either by perjured testimony, falsification of evidence, or probable cause.
Perez's cooperation led to a cascade of revelations, implicating not only himself, but also exposing the misconduct of numerous other officers within the Rampart division. His testimony implicated a staggering 70 other officers in various forms of misconduct, ranging from planting evidence to perjury and even involvement in criminal activities. The impact of Perez's cooperation was profound. Over 100 convictions were overturned based on his testimony, as the credibility of the officers involved in those cases came into question. The revelations shook the foundations of the criminal justice system, leaving many to question the integrity of the LAPD and the validity of the convictions that had been obtained. In February 2000, former Los Angeles police officer Raphael Perez was sentenced to 5 years in prison for stealing 8 pounds of cocaine from an LAPD evidence room. He also pleaded guilty to new charges resulting from the shooting of Javier Ovando, an unarmed gang member whom Perez and his partner framed. The Rampart scandal, fueled by Perez's cooperation, led to a reckoning within the LAPD. It exposed systemic issues of corruption, abuse of power, and a lack of accountability within the department. The scandal prompted a wave of internal investigations and reforms aimed at restoring public trust and ensuring that such misconduct would not be tolerated in the future.
Number one, those reports have to be reviewed by supervisors. We cannot allow individual officers to write the reports, approve them, and put them in the system.
Is that what happened before?
That's just one of the common failings that happened at Rampart.
The impact on the Rampart division and the LAPD as a whole was significant. It forced the department to confront its own failings and implement measures to prevent a recurrence of such widespread corruption. The scandal served as a wake-up call, prompting a renewed commitment to transparency, accountability, and ethical conduct within the ranks of the LAPD. Robert Gisevius, Kenneth Bowen, and Anthony Villavaso. On the morning of September 4, 2005, the Danziger Bridge in New Orleans became the backdrop for a horrifying incident that would forever change the lives of those involved and shake the community to its core. It was a day that started with hope for recovery and rebuilding after the devastation of Hurricane Katrina, but it quickly turned into a nightmare. As the city struggled to recover from the aftermath of the hurricane, the New Orleans Police Department, NOPD, was tasked with maintaining order and protecting the citizens. years. However, the events that unfolded on the Danziger Bridge would reveal a dark side of law enforcement that shattered the trust of the community. It all began when a distress call came in, reporting an officer down and shots fired. Officers Robert Gisevius, Kenneth Bowen, and Anthony Villavaso, along with several other NOPD officers, responded to the call. What should have been a mission to protect and serve turned into a scene of unimaginable violence. As the officers arrived at the bridge, they encountered a group of unarmed civilians who were simply trying to navigate the chaos and devastation left in the wake of Hurricane Katrina. Without warning or provocation, Gisevius, Bowen, and Villavaso opened fire on the civilians, unleashing a hail of bullets that would claim the lives of two innocent individuals. 17-year-old James Brissett and 40-year-old Ronald Madison were among the victims of the senseless violence. Brissett, a young man with dreams and aspirations, had his life cut short in a matter of seconds. Madison, a mentally challenged man, was simply in the wrong place at the wrong time. Their deaths would forever haunt their families and the community, but the horror did not end there. 4 other civilians were also wounded in the barrage of gunfire. The bridge, once a symbol of connection and unity, became a site of tragedy and despair. The very officers who were meant to protect the citizens had become the perpetrators of violence. In the aftermath of the shootings, the NOPD attempted to cover up their actions. They falsely reported that they had encountered armed suspects who had fired upon them, justifying their use of deadly force. But the truth would eventually come to light, thanks to the relentless pursuit of justice by those who refused to let the incident be swept under the rug. Reverend Raymond Brown, the local head of the National Action Network, NAN, described the shootings as a racial tragedy. The incident highlighted the deep-rooted racial tensions that plagued the city and further exacerbated the community's distrust in law enforcement. After years of legal proceedings, the 5 New Orleans Police Department NOPD officers involved in the cover-up of the Danziger Bridge shootings were finally brought to trial. The convictions that followed seemed to be a step towards justice for the victims and the community. However, the subsequent vacating of these convictions would leave a bitter taste of injustice in the mouths of those seeking accountability. On August 5, 2011, a federal jury in New Orleans convicted officers Robert Gisevius, Kenneth Bowen, Anthony Villavaso, Robert Falcon, and Arthur Kaufman of myriad charges related to the cover-up and deprivation of civil rights. The convictions were hailed as a significant milestone in the fight against police misconduct and abuse of power. An attorney for the U.S. Justice Department even described the case as the most significant police misconduct prosecution in the U.S. since the Rodney King beating case. However, the joy and relief felt by the community were short-lived. On September 17, 2013, the convictions were vacated due to prosecutorial misconduct. U.S. District Judge Kurt Engelhardt ordered a new trial, citing grotesque misconduct on the part of federal prosecutors who had allegedly posted negative comments online about the case using pseudonyms. The decision to vacate the convictions sent shockwaves through the community, reigniting feelings of anger, frustration, and a deep sense of betrayal. The vacating of the convictions was a devastating blow to the victims' families and the community at large. It felt like a betrayal of trust, as if justice had been snatched away at the last moment. The community had hoped that the convictions would serve as a deterrent to future acts of police misconduct and as a symbol of accountability. Instead, they were left questioning the integrity of the justice system. The subsequent legal proceedings were a grueling process for all involved. The families of James Brissett and Ronald Madison, along with activists and supporters, fought tirelessly to ensure that the officers would be held accountable for their actions. The vacating of the convictions felt like a slap in the face, a painful reminder of the challenges faced in seeking justice for victims of police violence. The vacating of the convictions also highlighted the need for reforms within the criminal justice system. It exposed the flaws and vulnerabilities that allowed prosecutorial misconduct to occur, undermining the pursuit of justice. The community demanded transparency, accountability, and a fair trial that would finally bring closure to the victims' families and restore faith in the justice system. Finally, on April 20th, 2016, the 5 former officers pleaded guilty to various charges related to the shooting. In return, they received reduced sentences ranging from 3 to 12 years in prison. The sentences were a fraction of what they had originally faced, causing further outrage among the community. The plea deals left many feeling that justice had once again been compromised, that the punishment did not fit the severity of the crimes committed.
Everyone will have their own thoughts about the sentences. Some may think they're too high, some may think they're too low. But whatever you think at this time, these sentences represent the great success of the various parts that make up an outstanding criminal justice system.
The community's response to the Danziger Bridge shootings was one of outrage and a demand for justice. Activists, civil rights organizations, and concerned citizens united in their pursuit of accountability and systemic change. They refused to let the incident be forgotten or dismissed as an isolated event. In response to the community's demands, efforts were made to implement reforms within the NOPD. The department underwent significant changes, including increased training on the appropriate use of force, enhanced accountability measures, and improved community relations. These reforms aimed to rebuild the trust that had been shattered and to ensure that incidents like the Danziger Bridge shootings would never happen again. The tragedy served as a catalyst for change, forcing communities and institutions to confront the deep-rooted issues that have plagued our society for far too long. It is a reminder that the fight for justice is ongoing and that the voices of the victims and their families must be heard. If you like this video, click the card on your screen to see more videos like this.